The screaming wasn't coming from the hallway. It wasn't coming from the other patients either. It was coming from inside Ray Walker's skull. It rose suddenly sharp and electric like feedback from an old radio stuck between stations. Ray felt it before he heard it. A pressure behind his eyes, a tightening in his chest, a heat that crawled up his spine and settled at the base of his throat. He sat rigid in a molded plastic chair, hands clamped around the armrests, while the room stared at him. The group therapy circle had stopped breathing. 12 chairs, 12 bodies, some slumped, some rocking slightly, some staring into nothing. A woman near the window whispered to herself. An old man across from Ray blinked slowly, like he was underwater. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and artificial lavender. The social worker, a woman in her 30s with a cardigan 2 sizes too big and a clipboard hugged to her chest, cleared her throat. "Raymond," she said gently, in the voice people used when they were afraid of setting something off. "How are we feeling this morning?" That was when it snapped. Ray didn't remember standing up. He remembered the sound of blood rushing in his ears, drowning out the room. He remembered thinking, not for the first time, that this place felt less like treatment and more like storage. "I'm not a goddamn plant," he said, his voice low but shaking. "Don't water me with small talk." A few people flinched. The social worker smiled reflexively the way people do when they've been trained to stay calm no matter what. "We're just trying to check in," she said. That smile did it. The heat surged. Ray heard his own voice rise raw and cracked louder than he'd meant it to be. "You call this living?" he shouted. "I'm not dead yet." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. No one spoke. Someone coughed. The fake fireplace screen on the wall flickered flames dancing soundlessly. The social worker scribbled something on her clipboard, avoided his eyes, and muttered about taking a break. Ray sat back down hard. The chair creaked beneath him. Inside his head, the static buzzed on. An hour later, Ray shuffled down the main corridor of Mountain Pines Mental Wellness Center, his rubber-soled shoes whispering against the linoleum floor. The overhead lights hummed softly. The walls were painted a calming shade of blue that felt more like surrender than peace. Mountain Pines sat just outside Asheville, tucked against the lower ridges of the Blue Mountains. From the outside, it looked like a rehab resort. From the inside, it felt like a place where time went to thin out and disappear. He passed the recreation room where Terry played checkers against himself again, moving both sets of pieces with equal seriousness. 2 orderlies laughed quietly near the vending machines, their voices dropping when they noticed Ray. They all knew his file. Vietnam veteran, combat engineer, Purple Heart, PTSD, widower, emotional instability following spousal loss, admitted under family guardianship. Translated into plain language, it meant too much trouble to manage alone. Ray pushed open the door to his room and closed it behind him. The lock clicked softly, not loud enough to feel like a prison, but solid enough to remind him it wasn't optional. The room was small. Bed, desk, chair. A radiator that hissed without ever really warming the air. No personal belongings except what had been approved. On the desk sat a single photograph in a cheap plastic frame. Helen. She stood on their back porch, sunlight catching in her hair, a red bandana tied around her head. There was dirt on her cheek and a grin on her face as she held up a tomato, proud like she'd just discovered fire. Ray lowered himself onto the edge of the bed and stared at it. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in over a year. The tears had come at the funeral hot and sudden, and then something inside him had sealed shut. What remained was a constant aching pressure, like grief had compressed itself into a smaller, sharper shape. He picked up the remote and turned on the television more for the noise than the content. Silence was dangerous. Silence let the static get louder. The local news droned on, weather, traffic, a story about a missing hiker. Then the image changed. A house appeared on the screen. Ray froze. White siding, green shutters. A porch with wide steps and thick wooden posts. He knew those posts. He'd replaced them himself after a bad storm, cursing the whole time while Helen stood behind him, pretending not to laugh. The caption read, "From abandoned property to community haven." The camera panned across the yard. His yard. The lawn where Helen's rose bushes once grew was gone, replaced by raised garden beds overflowing with greens and late-season vegetables. People moved through the space, working together. A woman waved at the camera. A young man carried a crate of produce. Children ran past the porch steps. A sign hung above the front door, "The Haven Garden Project." Ray leaned forward so abruptly the remote slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Once a forgotten house on Burnett Ridge, the reporter said, now transformed into a shared agricultural space serving Asheville's most vulnerable. The words blurred. Strangers stood where Helen had planted lavender. They laughed where she had knelt in the dirt. They called it something new, like the past had been scraped away and repainted. The segment cut to a commercial before Ray could hear more. He stared at the blank screen between ads, chest-tight, heart pounding. They hadn't just sold his house. They had erased it. Dinner that night was chicken with beige gravy and carrots cooked into submission. Ray pushed the tray aside and sat at the far end of the cafeteria table next to Walter. Walter's hands shook constantly, a fine tremor that never quite stopped. He had a thin mustache and eyes that missed nothing. He used to be a journalist back when words mattered to him more than schedules and pill cups. Ray trusted Walter because Walter didn't rush him. "I saw my house today," Ray said quietly. Walter looked up. "In your sleep, no. On the news." That got his attention. "Your house," Ray nodded. "They turned it into a community garden." Walter considered that. "How do you feel about it?" Ray stared at the untouched food. His voice came out rough. "Like I died and nobody bothered to tell me." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Walter asked, "So what are you going to do?" Ray looked up. His eyes were sharp now, the fog burned away. "I need to go home," he said. That night, as the facility settled into its artificial quiet, Ray lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The static buzzed, but now it had a direction. He opened the drawer of his desk and took out a pencil. His hands weren't steady, but they were precise. He began to draw. He wasn't escaping. He was returning. The pencil moved slowly but deliberately across the page. Ray's hand shook a little, but his lines were confident. He didn't need to think, his muscles remembered. The sketch forming on the cheap notepad was a floor plan, the hallways of Mountain Pines, the location of every security camera, every nurse station, every blind spot. He knew the schedule. He'd memorized it months ago. That wasn't hard. Mountain Pines operated on repetition. Medication at 8, 12, and 6. Meals at 8:30, 12:30, and 5:00. Lights out at 9:00. Head counts every 2 hours. Night staff down to 2 after midnight, 1 nurse, 1 orderly. The third shift nurse was always the same, Carla. Nice enough, but took long breaks, usually between 2:45 and 3:15 a.m. That was the window. He flipped the page and began sketching the exit routes. Back corridor, laundry chute, emergency exit with a push bar that wouldn't trigger the alarm if they timed it right. From the bed across the room, Walter's voice broke the quiet. "You're really going to do this?" Ray didn't look up. "Yes." Walter shifted his bones, creaking louder than the bed frame. How far do you think you'll get before someone drags you back in? Ray paused, then turned the notepad to show him. Far enough. Walter sat up slowly, rubbing the side of his neck. You know this is nuts, I know, Ray said, but so is being buried alive. Walter looked at the drawing again, then at Ray. You'll need help. Ray raised an eyebrow. You offering? Walter chuckled. Hell no. I'm half metal. I set off microwaves. But I might know someone who can help you. Or at least not stop you. Ray narrowed his eyes. Who, Lena? Ray's expression tightened. The nurse. Mid-30s. Cuban-American. Kind eyes. Moved fast, didn't talk much. She was the only staff member who didn't treat him like a broken lawn chair. You sure? Walter nodded. She sees more than she says, and she listens. That's rare around here. Ray chewed on the inside of his cheek, then stood, walked across the room, and opened the top drawer of his dresser. Inside, beneath a few rolled socks, was the burner phone Lena had once confiscated from a younger patient and forgot to log into evidence. Ray had stolen it back 2 weeks later. He hadn't used it. Not yet. He turned it on. 1 bar of signal. He stared at it for a moment, then handed it to Walter. Call her. Walter grinned. I love being the accomplice. Makes me feel young. 15 minutes later, Lena stood in their room. She wore scrubs and a hoodie, her badge tucked into her pocket. Her dark hair was tied back in a bun, eyes alert, arms crossed. You're planning something, she said. Ray didn't flinch. I'm leaving. You say that like it's a dentist appointment, she said, tone flat. I'm not crazy. I know that. He blinked. You do. Lena sat on the edge of the bed. Crazy people don't draw building schematics. They throw pudding at walls and forget their name. She leaned forward. But you're also institutionalized, which means you can't just walk out the front door. Ray handed her the floor plan. She studied it, eyes scanning the details. You've been planning this a while? Ray nodded. Since the day I realized no one was coming back for me. Lena set the paper down gently. You have a place to go. I saw my house on the news, he said. It's not mine anymore, but it's where I belong. Lena raised an eyebrow. You're going back to your old house. They turned it into some kind of community project. A garden. I need to see it with my own eyes. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, You can lock a man in, but you can't lock out what he remembers. Ray stared at her. The sentence echoed. I'll help you, Lena said. But only if you promise me 2 things. I'm listening. 1, you call me as soon as you get there. If anything happens, if you get hurt, if you get stuck, you call me. Okay? 2, you tell no one else. Not the other residents, not the staff, not even Walter once you go. Ray glanced at Walter. He already knows. Then he keeps his mouth shut, Lena said. Walter raised a shaky hand. Scout's honor. Lena stood and adjusted her hoodie. There's an Uber drop-off point 3 blocks from here. You'll need to make it there without being seen. I'll unlock the emergency hallway at 2:50 a.m. You'll have 15 minutes. After that, you're on your own. Ray's heart pounded, not in fear, but in something sharper. Purpose. Thank you, he said. I'm not doing it for you, Lena replied. I'm doing it for the man in that photo on your desk. The one who used to smile. She turned and walked out. Ray didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, fully clothed, shoes on a small pack under the blanket beside him. Inside, 2 changes of clothes, $320 in cash, a picture of Helen, a knife he'd smuggled out from the gardening therapy room, and a note he'd written in case he didn't make it. Walter didn't sleep either. Around 2:15, he sat up and coughed hard. You okay? Ray asked. Walter wheezed. This body's running on fumes, friend, but my soul's on fire. He looked at Ray. You sure about this? I've never been more sure. Walter nodded slowly. Then go, and don't look back. At 2:45, Ray slipped into the hallway. His sneakers were silent on the tile. The air smelled like antiseptic and fear. He passed the nurse station empty as expected and turned into the west corridor. At 2:49, he reached the door. A soft click came from the lock. He turned the knob and slipped into the emergency hallway. At 2:53, Ray stepped into the night air for the first time in 423 days. Cold, real, alive. He looked up at the moon. It was full, hanging like an eye in the sky watching him. He didn't run. He walked. 3 blocks later, he reached the gas station where the Uber was scheduled to arrive. He leaned against the ice machine and checked the phone Lena gave him. 1 bar of signal. Enough. He texted a single word to the number she'd entered, out. The car arrived at 3:08 a.m., silver Toyota. No questions asked. As Ray climbed into the back seat, the driver glanced at him through the mirror. Where to? Ray answered quietly. Burnett Ridge. He sat back staring at the trees blurring past the window. He didn't know what he'd find when he got there. But he knew why he was going. He wasn't escaping. He was returning. And in the distance, the mountains waited. The car rumbled softly as it pulled off the highway and onto the winding roads of Burnett Ridge. Morning had just begun to smear pale light across the mountains, but mist still clung to the trees like forgotten breath. Ray sat in the back seat, his pack clutched against his chest, jaw tight. He hadn't said a word the entire ride. The driver, a quiet woman in her 40s named Teresa, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Her voice was cautious, but not unkind. You visiting someone out here? Ray didn't answer right away. His fingers traced the edge of the photo of Helen in his jacket pocket. No, he said finally. Just coming home. The car fell quiet again, the only sound the low hum of tires over cracked asphalt and the occasional whistle of wind through the window gap. Burnett Ridge had changed. Fewer trees. More signs. A new gas station where the old bakery used to be. But Ray recognized the curve in the road, the stone fence near Miller's farm, the dip where the rain always pooled after a storm. He felt his heartbeat quicken. Not from fear, but from something older, memory. Teresa slowed. What's the address? 345 Burnett Ridge Road, he said. The words tasted like rust and honey. They crested the final hill. Ray's breath caught. There it was. His house. Only it wasn't. The bones were the same. The sloped roof, the wide porch, the bay window where Helen used to keep her tea herbs. But everything else had changed. The lawn had been torn up, replaced with neatly organized garden beds, wooden trellises, rows of vegetables stretching across where the swing set used to stand. People moved through the space like they belonged. A woman knelt by a row of kale trimming leaves with careful hands. A young man in boots carried a tray of seedlings toward the porch. Laughter echoed from somewhere behind the house. And then Ray saw the sign. The Haven Garden Project. A hand-painted wooden plank nailed above the front door. Bright letters. Cheerful. Final. His house had been renamed. Rewritten. Teresa pulled up to the curb and turned in her seat. You sure this is it? Ray stared out the window, eyes burning. I'm sure, she hesitated. Do you want me to wait? He shook his head. She nodded once, kindly. Take care of yourself. He stepped out onto the pavement, the morning air biting at his cheeks. His knees ached, but he barely noticed. He walked up the path slowly, not trusting his legs. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes, familiar and foreign all at once. A woman with silver hair spotted him first. She stood near the porch, holding a clipboard, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt speckled with dirt. She looked like someone who belonged to the land. She smiled, walking toward him. "Good morning. You're here for the volunteer orientation." Ray stopped at the edge of the porch. His voice came out low, dry. "This is my house." She blinked. "Sorry I lived here," he said. "For 52 years. My name is Raymond Walker. My wife and I built this porch with our own hands." The smile faded from her face. "I'm Marianne," she said slowly, "director of the garden project. This house was donated to the community after the Hendersons passed. Hendersons, a young couple. Mark and Julie. They bought the place a while back. Started this whole thing. After the accident, the community raised funds to keep it going." Ray swayed slightly, gripping the porch rail. "Accident," Marianne nodded quietly. "Car crash, black ice. Last winter." Ray closed his eyes. The last thread of anger unraveled into something more complicated. Grief, maybe. Gratitude. Confusion. He opened them again, looking past her to the windows where Helen once waited with coffee in the mornings. There were people inside now. Young and old. Talking. Laughing. One of them played a guitar. It wasn't his house anymore. Not really. But it wasn't empty either. A young man approached from the side yard carrying a toolbox. He saw Ray and paused. "Everything okay?" Marianne nodded slightly. "This is Mr. Walker. He used to live here." The man's expression shifted, not shock recognition, like something suddenly clicked into place. "You're Helen's husband," he said. Ray's head jerked. "What, my mom lived across the street," the man said. "She used to bring over banana bread. She always talked about Helen's garden." Ray didn't know what to say. The wind stirred around them. Marianne stepped aside. "Would you like to come inside?" Ray hesitated, then nodded. The door creaked in a way that hadn't changed. Inside, the space was both familiar and new. The walls had been opened up. Furniture moved. Tables arranged for shared meals. Bookshelves lined with seed catalogs and gardening guides. A hand-drawn chart of crop rotation schedules hung where the TV used to be. But the hardwood beneath his feet, he remembered sanding it with Helen in '89. The window above the sink still caught the same morning light. The corner by the stairs still had the dent where their youngest had crashed a tricycle into the wall. Ray stood in the middle of it, all silent. The voices around him quieted as people noticed him. A few stopped what they were doing. Marianne touched his arm gently. "You okay?" Ray looked at her. His voice was steady. "They didn't just sell my house," he said. "They erased me." "No," she said softly. "You're here. That means something." They led him to the kitchen table. Someone poured tea. No one asked too many questions. They just listened as he talked. About Helen, about the roses, about the year the pipes froze, and he had to build a fire in the basement to keep the floor warm. And as he spoke, something softened in the room. The volunteers didn't look at him like a stranger anymore. They looked at him like a page from a book they'd never finished reading. "You built this," one of them said. "All of this started because of what you and your wife planted." Ray didn't know what to say. Outside, a breeze swept across the garden beds. The lavender swayed. He stood slowly and walked to the window. The rows were neat, beautiful, productive. Life growing from the land he once knew, like the back of his hand. He whispered mostly to himself, "We're not escaping, we're returning." That evening, Marianne offered him the guest room upstairs. He didn't answer right away. He just looked around the house that used to be his and felt for the first time in years like maybe he hadn't been completely lost. Ray didn't sleep much that night. The bed was warm, the room was quiet, but his body refused to surrender. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling of the guest room, trying to reconcile the strange collision of familiarity and dislocation. This had been Susan's room, his youngest, before she moved to Oregon, before the silence between them grew thick and heavy. The walls had been repainted, the posters replaced with prints of vegetables and wildflowers, but the window still overlooked the backyard. His backyard. Only now it was covered in trellises and tomato vines and orderly raised beds. He could still make out the spot where the arbor used to be the one he built for Helen on their 30th anniversary. That old cherry tree was gone, though. Everything was different. Everything was functional. Downstairs, soft laughter and the faint sound of a guitar rose through the floorboards. Someone strummed a few off-key chords, followed by clapping. They were having a meal, maybe music night. That was something Helen used to do Sunday dinners with neighbors' spontaneous sing-alongs in the kitchen. He hadn't realized how much of it he missed until now. Ray sat up, rubbed the back of his neck, and walked quietly to the window. The garden glowed under soft string lights. It looked like something out of a magazine. Picturesque, alive, and yet he felt like a ghost, wandering through a life he'd already lived. In the morning, he woke to sunlight and the smell of bread baking. He dressed slowly, joints stiff, and made his way downstairs. The kitchen buzzed with activity volunteers passing plates, preparing food boxes, and filling coolers with produce. The energy was communal, choreographed chaos. Ray stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Marianne noticed him and smiled. "Morning, Ray. Did you sleep all right?" He shrugged. "I've had worse." She motioned to a stool at the counter. Coffee's fresh, toast's on its way. He sat down. Across the room, Jesse, the young man with the toolbox from the day before, was wrestling with a stubborn wheelbarrow axle, cursing under his breath. "You're missing a cotter pin," Ray called out. Jesse looked up, surprised. "Yeah," Ray nodded. "Can't hold tension without one. You got a vice grip and a nail." Jesse disappeared into the utility closet. Moments later, he returned with both, and Ray slid off the stool, walked over slowly, and knelt beside the wheelbarrow with a grunt. In a few minutes, the axle was stable. Jesse blinked. That actually worked. Ray smirked. "Not my first wheelbarrow." They laughed genuinely, and it echoed louder than expected. Back inside, Marianne approached. "You have skills," she said. "We're always looking for help with repairs equipment, you name it." Ray hesitated. "I'm not here to volunteer. I just wanted to see what they'd done to it. To the house." She studied him gently. "You sure about that?" He didn't answer. Later they walked the garden paths. The rows were perfect, sprouting broccoli, onions, herbs in full bloom. Ray noticed the irrigation system, the composting bins, the clever way someone had used salvaged fencing to trellis the squash. "This place runs like a machine," he said. Marianne smiled. That was Julie. Ray's brow furrowed. Julie, she and her husband Mark started the garden. Bought the house 3 years ago. Moved in, had 2 little kids. He was a social worker. She was a high school biology teacher. She was the one who dreamed up the garden. Ray swallowed. What happened to them? They were killed in a car accident last December. Ice storm on the Blue Ridge Parkway. She died 3 days after him. Ray stopped walking. Marianne slowed too. After the funeral, her brother offered to sell the house, but the community raised the money to buy it. We couldn't let it go. Julie kept journals, blueprints, planting guides, letters to the city. She wanted this to be more than just a garden. She wanted it to feed people, to teach them something, to connect them. Ray's voice came out hoarse. She did all this in... What, 2 years? Marianne nodded. It started small, just some raised beds. Then neighbors joined. Then schools. We partnered with food banks. Now we feed about 60 families a week, and we host workshops, composting, preserving crop rotation, that kind of thing. Ray looked around, as if seeing the space again for the first time. She must have been something he murmured. She was. They stood in silence, watching a small group of teenagers pull weeds near the back fence. One of them waved. Ray didn't wave back. He wasn't ready. Eventually, he said, "You're all doing good work here. We're trying." He looked down at the path, then back at her. "I don't know where I fit in." Marianne didn't try to answer that. Instead, she said, "You want to know what I think? Go ahead. I think this house doesn't belong to any one person anymore. Not to us, not to the Hendersons, not even to you and Helen. I think it belongs to whoever keeps it alive." Ray flinched just a little. He looked up at the house. The paint was newer, but the porch still sagged slightly on the left side. He'd always meant to fix that. He remembered Helen in the garden dirt under her nails, her sun hat tilted back, as she laughed at something he said. Those moments were still inside these walls, still rooted here. "This place forgot me," he said quietly. "It moved on." "No," Marianne said gently. "It grew." Ray didn't respond. He walked back toward the house, slow but steady. That evening he sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills. The scent of basil drifted from the windowsill. Jessie passed by and nodded. Ray nodded back. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight the house didn't feel like it was pushing him out. It felt like it was waiting. Ray dreamed of Helen that night. She was kneeling in the backyard, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in the soil. The sun lit her shoulders, her hair tied back in a loose braid. She hummed a tune he almost remembered, a melody from their youth, maybe something from the radio on long drives. She turned and smiled at him, her hands full of seeds. "You can't grow anything without getting dirty first," she said. Then she pressed the seeds into his palm. Ray woke with that warmth still in his chest. Downstairs, the house was already alive. It always was, he'd come to learn. Morning meant movement, coffee, brewing, volunteers buzzing in and out with crates, lists, tools. The sounds weren't chaotic. They were the sounds of people who had found a reason to wake up. He dressed slowly, stretching the stiffness from his back, and made his way to the kitchen. Marianne was at the counter, writing on a clipboard. "You're up early," she said without looking. "I'm a military man," Ray replied, reaching for a mug. "Waking up early is the only part I didn't hate." She smiled. "You think you'd want to stay a few more days?" Ray didn't answer. Not right away. He sipped his coffee and looked out the window. The sun caught the edges of the garden beds like gold. "I'll think about it." He meant it. He stepped out onto the porch and into the morning air. The dew hadn't burned off yet, and the scent of wet earth hung heavy in the breeze. He liked it. It smelled like work, like something real. In the garden, Jessie was hunched over the same wheelbarrow from yesterday, cursing under his breath. "You again," Ray called out. "You break it or just insult it to death." Jessie laughed. "Definitely the second one." Ray walked over, rolling his sleeves up. "Let's take a look." It was the axle again, rusted deeper than before. They pulled the wheel off, worked in quiet coordination. Jessie handed tools without being asked. Ray didn't realize how much he missed that working with his hands, not just for himself, but for something that mattered. "You ever work with a crew?" Jessie asked. Ray grunted. "My whole damn life." Jessie glanced at him. "You want to teach me some of that?" Ray looked at him surprised. "You asking to be bossed around by an old man? I'm asking to stop screwing up every third thing I touch." Ray smirked. Fair enough. By noon, the wheelbarrow was fixed, the shed reorganized, and Jessie was sweating and smiling like a kid who finally solved a math problem. Inside the kitchen bustled. Ruth, the retired chef who cooked for the crew, was prepping tomato soup. Ray offered to help, and Ruth promptly handed him a bowl of onions and told him to stop hovering and start chopping. He did. The smell of garlic hit the air. It reminded him of Helen's Sunday sauce, the way she danced around the kitchen with bare feet and too much oregano. He stopped chopping just for a second. Ruth noticed. "You all right?" Ray nodded. "Just remembering." After lunch, Marianne found him on the back porch, a clipboard in hand. "We're short 2 drivers for tonight's distribution," she said. "We deliver to the Methodist Church and 2 apartment complexes across town." Ray raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm ready for that? I think you already are." He looked down at his hands. "They didn't just sell my house," he said again, softer this time. "They erased me." Marianne sat beside him. "No, they didn't. You're sitting here. You're fixing what's broken. You're feeding people. You're remembered." She placed the clipboard next to him. "You don't have to do anything, but you're welcome to." That evening, Ray rode with Ruth and Jessie in the van. They packed boxes of produce, lettuce, cucumbers, peppers, squash, each labeled and sorted by household size. Ray took the middle seat, hands on his knees, nervous in a way he hadn't felt since basic training. At the first stop, a church basement, they were met by a volunteer team of teens. They swarmed the van, laughing, unloading with practiced ease. One boy, maybe 16, offered a high five to Jessie. Ray stood awkwardly off to the side. "You knew?" the boy asked. Ray shrugged. "I guess." The boy smiled. "Welcome to the crew." The second stop was quieter. An apartment complex, seniors mostly. Ruth handed out boxes while Ray stood under a flickering security light. An older woman in a worn sweater took a box from Jessie, then paused when she saw Ray. "You look familiar," she said. Ray smiled gently. "Probably not." She tilted her head. "You live at that garden house I used to," he said. "Then I didn't. Now, I'm not sure." The woman smiled, warm and understanding. "Then maybe you're just finding your way back." Back at the house, the moon was rising, fat and low behind the hills. The garden glowed under the porch lights. Ray sat on the swing alone, hands folded in his lap. Marianne joined him a few minutes later, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "How was it?" she asked. Ray sipped. Let the warmth settle in his chest. "It felt right," he said. They rocked together in the quiet. "I keep thinking," Ray said after a while, "that I came here to say goodbye, to see it one last time, let it go. But now..." Marianne waited. "I don't want to let it go." She smiled, not surprised. "You don't have to know everything today, Ray. But here's what I do know. This place isn't about holding on to the past. It's about honoring it and then choosing what comes next." He stared at the rows of basil and squash and lavender, the wooden sign above the porch, the window Helen once leaned out of to call him in for dinner. She would have loved this, he whispered. The work, the purpose, the people. Marianne nodded. "Then maybe you're exactly where she'd want you to be." Ray looked down at his hands, dirt still under his nails from fixing the wheelbarrow. "She'd probably tell me to stop sulking and start planting," he muttered. "She sounds like a smart woman." He smiled for the first time all day. That night, Ray lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house creaked. Someone laughed downstairs. A chair scraped. Life moving forward. In the stillness, he whispered to the dark, "Okay, Helen. I'm listening." The sun was barely up when Ray wandered into the shed behind the garden house. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just following a pull, quiet and steady, like a thread tugging at the back of his mind. The morning air was crisp, filled with the scent of damp soil and wood smoke drifting in from someone's fireplace down the ridge. The shed hadn't changed much. Same crooked hinges, same patchy roof. Inside, the familiar smell of fertilizer, rusted tools, and cedar hit him like a memory he hadn't expected to miss. He stood there, surrounded by trowels and twine garden stakes leaning against the walls like old soldiers at rest. His eyes drifted to the corner shelf, where Helen used to keep her seed boxes labeled in her handwriting. He walked toward it. The boxes were mostly gone, replaced by new plastic containers. But one battered wooden crate still sat on the bottom shelf, dusty and half forgotten. He pulled it out carefully and lifted the lid. Inside were notebooks neatly stacked and tied with twine. Gardening journals. Helen's. His breath caught. He carried the box to the workbench, untied the knot, and opened the first notebook. Pages of hand-drawn garden layouts, notes about frost dates and sun exposure tips for compost layering. But tucked between the pages of the last book was something else, a loose sheet of paper, faded and creased at the corners. It was her handwriting, but the ink was bolder, more personal than the rest. Ray unfolded it slowly. If you can still plant, you can still grow. His fingers trembled. Helen had written it in blue ink, underlined it once. No explanation. Just that. He stared at it for a long time, the words seeping in like water through dry ground. He heard a knock on the shed door. Marianne leaned in. "We've got new volunteers arriving in 10. Think you'd want to help me walk them through orientation?" Ray looked down at the note, then at her, then back to the dirt beneath his boots. "I guess I could try," he said. Marianne smiled. "I'll meet you out front." 10 minutes later, Ray stood beside her on the front porch, hands in his pockets, shoulders stiff. A group of 5 volunteers gathered at the steps, college kids, mostly, plus a retired man named Calvin, who'd just moved to the area. They all held clipboards and looked unsure of what they'd signed up for. Marianne spoke first. "Welcome to the Haven Garden Project. This is Ray Walker. He'll be walking you through the basics." Ray raised an eyebrow at her. She gave him a subtle nudge and stepped back. He cleared his throat. "This place runs on dirt and sweat. If you're looking to post Instagram selfies with strawberries, you're in the wrong garden." A few of them chuckled nervously. "But if you want to learn how to grow something with your own hands, how to feed people, how to fix things that are busted, how to make the ground give back what it owes, then we've got plenty of room." He gestured to the beds behind him. "Pick a row. Start by weeding. You'll know pretty quick if this is for you." They scattered into the garden, and Ray watched them go. Marianne joined him, arms folded. "You're a natural." "I'm an old man with a loud voice," he said. "People listen because they're not sure if I'm going to yell or not." She laughed. "Whatever works." They spent the next hour walking between rows, checking irrigation lines, answering questions. Ray corrected the spacing on a row of carrots. He showed one of the students how to mulch around the base of the tomatoes to lock in moisture. By midday, sweat clung to the back of his neck, and dirt lined the creases of his palms. He hadn't felt this kind of tired in years, but it was a good tired. After lunch, he returned to the shed and sat at the workbench, opening Helen's journals again. He flipped slowly through the pages, rows of tidy handwriting, pressed flowers between sheets, notations about which varieties thrived in the loamy patch by the old fence. In the back of one journal, he found something new. A letter, addressed to him. "Ray, I know you don't believe in signs. You believe in action, in showing up, in work. That's why I'm writing this, because I know if something ever happens to me, you'll stay busy and stubborn and quiet. But if you're reading this, it means you came back. And if you came back, it means you still believe in something. Even if you don't know what that is yet. This house isn't just ours. It never was. It's part of something bigger now. Let it be. Let yourself be part of it too. All my love, Helen Ray didn't cry. Not exactly. But he sat with the letter for a long time, eyes closed, hand resting on the edge of the page. That evening, he found Jessie near the compost pile, struggling to pull a warped plank from the back fence. Use a crowbar, Ray said. Leverage does more than strength ever will. Jessie stood up, wiping his forehead. You got time to show me how? Ray walked to the shed without answering and came back with the right tool. They fixed the fence together. Afterward, Jessie handed him a water bottle. You're not just visiting anymore, are you? Ray thought about that. No, he said. I don't think I am. Jessie nodded once, like that made sense. Ray glanced back at the garden, the light fading the beds soft in the dusk. Life everywhere, even in silence. If you can still plant, he murmured to himself, you can still grow. The house was no longer just a memory. It was becoming something again. Breathing. Rooted. So was he. Ray stood by the fence as dusk settled over Burnett Ridge. The sky stretched out in soft bands of lavender and gold, the garden bathed in that last quiet light of day. Behind him, the house buzzed with low conversation and the clatter of dishes from dinner. But Ray's focus was fixed just beyond the property line on the field next door. The lot had once belonged to the Crawfords. Ray remembered it well. A big empty space where kids played football in the fall and fireflies lit up the summer grass. Now it was choked with weeds and posted with a bright orange sign, property under contract, future site of Ridgeline Townhomes. The words stung like a slap. He read them twice then again, half hoping they'd change. Behind him, Jessie's voice broke the silence. You see the sign? Ray didn't turn. Yeah. Jessie walked up beside him, hands in his hoodie pockets. They say it's going to be 18 units, all glass and steel. No yards, no trees. Just parking and concrete. Ray's jaw clenched. They can't just tear up that field. He said more to himself than anyone else. It's a part of this place. Jessie looked over. That field used to be your kid's right. Ray nodded. We had a rope swing in that maple. Used to take Susan there on Saturdays, just the two of us. They stood in silence, listening to the wind. You gonna let it happen? Jessie asked finally. Ray didn't answer. Not right away. That night, Ray couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table long after the others had gone to bed, the letter from Helen still in his pocket. He kept pulling it out, reading the last few lines again and again. Let yourself be part of it too. He poured himself a small cup of black coffee and stared at the map Marianne had pinned to the wall plots of land surrounding the Haven garden, each marked with small, color-coded flags. The Crawford field had no green or blue flag, just a red X. At sunrise, he found Marianne on the porch, wrapped in a flannel blanket, sipping tea. He sat beside her quiet for a moment, then said, "What would it take to buy that lot?" She looked at him. The Crawford land. He nodded. Too much, she said. They're selling to developers. All cash, no contingencies. We'd need a miracle and about $150,000. Ray took a breath. Then let's make it happen. Marianne blinked. You serious? Ray looked her dead in the eye. I didn't come back here to watch it all get paved over. She set her tea down slowly. Ray, we're already stretched thin. We've got one part-time grant, a few monthly donors, and a budget that cries every time we replace a hose. Where would we even start? Ray stood up. We start where we always do, one shovel in the dirt, one seed in the ground. That morning, he gathered the volunteers in the backyard, Jesse, Ruth, Calvin, Lena, even a few of the high school kids who dropped by after class. He stood by the compost pile, arms crossed, his voice louder than usual. "They're planning to pour concrete over that field next door," he said. "But I say we fight for it." The group murmured. Jesse looked at him, confused but hopeful. How someone asked. "What can we do? We raise the money," Ray said. "We spread the word. We knock on doors, post flyers, talk to the town council, and show them this land matters. Not just because it's green, but because it feeds people. Because it belongs to this community." One of the teens raised a hand. "Like a fundraiser, more like a movement," Ray replied. Marianne stepped forward, her voice steady. "We'll need help. Connections. A media angle." Ray nodded. "Then let's start with the truth." He pulled out the letter from Helen and read it aloud. When he finished, the group was quiet, some blinking back tears, some staring at the ground. "If she believed in this," Ray said softly, "then I can't stand by and do nothing." Over the next few days, the energy shifted. The house buzzed with planning. Jesse helped design a flyer. Marianne contacted the local paper. Ruth baked pies for a bake sale. Calvin called an old friend who worked in real estate law to look into the contract. Ray worked the phone, the porch, and the fence line. He found himself standing in front of city council members, community leaders, and strangers telling stories. He'd never told anyone about the land, the garden, the way this place had pulled him back from the edge. Every time someone asked why he cared so much, he gave them the same answer. Because some things are worth saving even if they're already lost once. The story gained traction. A reporter from Asheville came out to do a piece. They interviewed Ray on the porch where he and Helen used to drink coffee every morning. His voice cracked when he talked about the swing and the maple tree. The next morning, the garden's website crashed from traffic. Donations started trickling in, $10, $20, sometimes more. Notes came with them. "My grandmother grew up in Burnett Ridge. I used to play in that field. I believe in what you're doing." Ray watched the numbers rise on Marianne's spreadsheet. Slowly, painfully slow, but rising. One evening, Jesse pulled Ray aside. "You ever think you'd be the guy leading a campaign?" Ray grunted. "I'm still getting used to being the guy who wears clean socks." They both laughed. But as the week went on, the pressure grew. They were still more than $80,000 short, and the deadline was approaching fast. Marianne started looking tired. Ruth snapped at one of the teens for spilling jam. Even Ray found himself pacing the house at night, counting numbers that never added up. Then one afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of orange, a car pulled into the gravel driveway. A man in a suit stepped out. He looked out of place. Shiny shoes, silver cufflinks, a sharp haircut that hadn't seen wind in years. He walked up to Ray with purpose. "You Raymond Walker." Ray straightened. "That's me." The man extended a hand. "Name's Daniel Pierce. I'm with Carolina Land Trust. Heard your story. We may have a proposal that could help." Ray didn't shake his hand. He narrowed his eyes. "What kind of proposal?" Pierce smiled, calm and practiced. "One that could keep your field green without putting a dime in a developer's pocket." Ray didn't like men in suits. Not the polished, high-sheen kind who drove up in quiet cars and offered things without being asked. He had met too many like Daniel Pierce in his life, back in the service, in city meetings, and especially in hospital corridors when Helen was dying. They always said the right things, always carried folders with color tabs and spoke with a calmness that wasn't real, the kind that covered motives with smiles. So when Pierce sat across from Ray and Marianne in the Havens dining room, Ray stayed silent at first, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching him like a hawk tracks a mouse in tall grass. "I've reviewed the Crawford Properties contract." Pierce began smoothly flipping open a leather folio. "And I think there may be an alternative to what the developers have planned." Marianne leaned forward slightly. "We're listening." Pierce laid a glossy folder between them, his tone perfectly rehearsed. "The Carolina Land Trust is prepared to offer a counterbid. We match the developer's cash offer. If the seller accepts, we take ownership but with a conservation easement in place. That means permanent protection. No townhomes, no strip malls, just green space." Ray raised an eyebrow. "And what's in it for you? We protect land." Pierce said calm and professional. "That's our mission. You'd continue stewarding the land for community use while we ensure it's never developed." Marianne flipped through the packet, eyes scanning the fine print. "So we don't own the land?" "You manage it," Pierce replied. "But the deed belongs to the trust. You operate under a stewardship agreement. It's fairly standard." Ray leaned forward, voice steady. "If you're offering a lifeboat, I need to know who's steering it." Pierce blinked. "I'm not sure I follow." Ray didn't blink. "You're asking us to jump off a sinking ship and land in your boat, but I don't know who's at the wheel or where you're headed." Pierce chuckled lightly, as if humoring a child. "Mr. Walker, we're here to help. You're facing a real deadline. We're offering a solution. A solution that puts you in charge," Ray said. "We get the land for now, but what happens when your board changes? When someone decides our garden isn't sustainable enough, or that we're not following some clause on page 73. There are compliance checks," Pierce said, keeping his tone even. "But nothing intrusive. Think of us as partners, not managers." "I don't need partners who can change the locks," Ray said, sharper now. Marianne touched his arm gently, trying to keep things from tipping over. Pierce smiled again, more tightly this time. "You're still short more than $75,000, and your deadline's under 3 weeks. You've done a great job with grassroots support, but it may not be enough. We're the only offer on the table that can guarantee preservation." Ray looked at the papers, at Marianne, then down at the wood grain of the table Helen once polished every Saturday, singing under her breath. "I need time," he said finally. Pierce stood, buttoning his jacket. "Of course, just don't take too long. Offers like this don't linger." After he left, the air seemed heavier, as if the walls themselves were waiting for someone to speak. Marianne broke the silence. "Well, at least it's something." Ray nodded slowly. "That's what worries me. You think he's lying? I think he's not saying everything. And I've lived long enough to know that's the same thing." They spent the evening digging into the trust. Marianne emailed friends in land conservation. Jesse found archived articles about similar deals. One project in Charlotte had gone well, but another in a small town south of Asheville had ended in legal battles when the trust reclaimed the land over a zoning dispute. Ray called Paul Banner, an old Army friend now working in nonprofit ethics. "You ever hear of the Carolina Land Trust?" he asked. "They're legit mostly," Paul said. "But I've seen them push out local groups when priorities change. You give up that deed, you better understand what you're signing away." Ray thanked him and hung up, staring out the window at the edge of the field. He could see the wooden stakes now surveyors had come quietly, already marking the future. The next morning, they called a meeting in the garden house. Marianne laid out the offer. Ray followed with the concerns. "We'd save the field," he said, "but we'd lose control, and control is what built this place." The volunteers were quiet. Some exchanged uneasy glances. Ruth finally spoke. "Could we counteroffer, ask them to co-own? We keep the title, they support the funding." Calvin rubbed his chin. Or ask for a land lease agreement with a guarantee of no revocation. It's worth a shot, Ray said. That afternoon, they worked on a revised proposal. Jesse typed. Marianne drafted clauses. Ray scribbled notes in the margins. They crafted a version that offered shared stewardship but retained local ownership. No revocation clause. A mutual accountability board. Naming rights for the trust. It was bold and risky. The next day, Pierce returned. Ray met him by the raised beds. He handed him the revised document. Pierce took his time reading it, lips tight. This would change our structure, he said. Ray nodded. That's the point. I'll take it back to our board, Pierce said. But this may be a tough sell. I'm counting on it, Ray said. We're not looking for a safety net that becomes a cage. That evening, Ray and Jesse sat on the porch. You think they'll go for it? Jesse asked. They might, Ray said. But even if they don't, at least we're not handing over the reins. What if this doesn't work? Ray stared at the fading horizon. Then we plant anyway. We don't stop. Inside, Marianne received an email confirmation of a local grant possibility, one that could cover a chunk if the trust deal fell through. They were closer than they'd ever been. That night, as Ray stood alone near the fence line, the wind picked up. The stakes rattled in the soil like bones trying to warn him. Rain lashed against the kitchen windows as Ray stood at the counter staring at the half-empty coffee pot. He didn't drink much anymore, at least not the real stuff, but this morning called for the bitter bite. The wind howled outside like it had an opinion of its own. Behind him, Marianne clicked away on her laptop. Her jaw was clenched, the muscles in her cheek twitching as she reread the same email for the fourth time. They're stalling, she said. Daniel said the board needs time to review community-specific clauses. That was 2 days ago. Ray didn't answer. He poured himself half a cup, leaned on the counter, and stared out at the garden now soaked and sagging under the storm. The Crawford field was a blur of brown mud and orange flags whipping in the wind. It was in that quiet tension that the knock came sharp, businesslike. Ray's gut tensed before he even turned toward the door. He opened it to find a man in a wool coat and a wide smile. Not Pierce, taller, thinner, confident in that way only someone with too much money and too little restraint could be. Mr. Walker, hi there. Name's Mitchell Crane. I'm with Pinnacle Growth Partners out of Atlanta. Mind if I come in for a moment? Ray didn't move. This isn't a sales call, is it? Crane grinned, unbothered. No, sir. This is an opportunity call. Marianne joined them at the door. What kind of opportunity? Crane stepped inside, brushing off his coat. I'll get right to it. We're in the process of acquiring the Crawford property. But when I visited the site, I saw this place, Haven Garden. Spoke to a few folks around town. Seems you've built something special here. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder with gold-embossed lettering. We're offering a full purchase agreement. Cash. You get the Crawford field and the Haven house appraised at Market Plus. You'd have enough to move your operation anywhere in the state. Maybe even better land. New start, same mission. Only cleaner. Easier. Ray's stomach turned. He knew this pitch. He'd heard it before, different words, same poison. Crane continued. You'd be out from under donation fatigue, grant deadlines, zoning battles. We take care of the logistics. You get to focus on your community work. Everyone wins. Ray said nothing, but his silence was loud. Marianne broke it. You want to buy the entire property? Crane smiled. Correct. The field and the house. We're looking to develop a luxury micro-village concept. Walkable paths, rooftop gardens, sustainable units. Your narrative fits beautifully into our long-term vision. Ray laughed once, dry, bitter. You want to bulldoze it and name a condo after it. Crane didn't flinch. Not necessarily. We're open to commemorative design. Perhaps a courtyard plaque. Ray stepped forward, standing eye to eye with the man. If we sign that paper, we sell more than soil, we sell our voice. Crane raised an eyebrow. Mr. Walker, with all due respect, your voice will be a memory if the land trust pulls out. You'll lose both lots. Then what? He turned, tapping the folder. Think about it. You'll have freedom security options. He left the folder on the dining room table and walked out as quickly and casually as he had arrived. The silence after the door clicked shut felt louder than the storm outside. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Marianne picked up the folder and opened it. Jesus, she whispered. They're offering nearly double the appraisal value. Jesse, who had come in halfway through the conversation, looked up from the hallway. We could pay off the debt. Start fresh. Ruth entered from the kitchen. We could expand. Help more people. Ray looked around the room. At the walls Helen had painted. The floors they'd scrubbed after community dinners. The smell of rosemary and tomatoes still clinging to the windowsills. They'd pave over her footprints, he said. You know that, right? Marianne closed the folder slowly. What if it's our only option? She asked, not unkindly. It's not. Ray replied, his voice firm. Not yet. That evening, they gathered the full team. The rain had stopped, but the mood was heavy. Ray stood at the front of the room, the folder in one hand. We've been offered a way out, he said. Quick, easy, clean. But it comes with a price. They'll build something shiny and greenwashed and name it after us, like we're some local legend who got too tired to fight. He looked around the room. Eyes met his, some full of hope, some full of fear. I didn't come back here for ease, Ray said. I came because this place saved me. It reminded me I still had something to give. You can't buy that, and I sure as hell won't sell it. No one clapped. No one needed to. Later that night, Ray sat alone on the porch steps, the offer folder open in his lap. Jesse came out and handed him a beer. Sat beside him. You sure about this? Jesse asked. Ray nodded. I've been broke before. I've been lost before. But I've never been bought. I'm not starting now. Jesse grinned. Good. I was going to feel real weird gardening next to a Tesla garage. Ray smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Inside, Marianne typed out a public update. She told the donors the truth, that they were under pressure, that outside money wanted to silence what was growing here, and that they weren't giving in. The next morning, the inbox was full. Donors doubled. Someone pledged matching funds. A retired professor offered legal assistance. A woman in Vermont sent $1,000 and a note that said, "This place reminds me of my grandparents. Keep going." Ray read it all and felt something shift. Not in the world, but in himself. A deeper root pushing down into the soil. He wasn't just fighting for a garden anymore. He was fighting for something that couldn't be bought. Ray stood at the whiteboard in the meeting room, marker in hand, staring at the revised proposal from the Carolina Land Trust. The words blurred together: non-renewable agreement, compliance, arbitration, revocation clause. A slow, creeping rage spread through his chest. Marianne sat across from him, glasses perched low on her nose, reading for the third time. They gutted it, she said finally. Everything we negotiated they reversed or buried in legal jargon. Ray let out a dry laugh. They want us to sign away the land and the right to question how it's used. Jesse leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So now we've got two offers, one that buys us out and one that controls us. Perfect. Ruth entered carrying coffee and a cinnamon loaf. I made carbs. That's all I can contribute at this point. No one laughed. Ray dropped the marker and sat hard in the chair. "We're not signing either. Period." Marianne looked up. "So what's the play now?" He tapped the table. "We go public louder than ever. We bring it to the people who put those folks in charge." "You mean the town council?" Jesse asked. Ray nodded. "And everyone who'll listen. If they won't hear us in the hall, we'll make sure they hear us in the street." They started that afternoon. Marianne and Jesse organized a town forum at the local library. Ruth called every local shop owner, pastor, teacher, and former council member she knew. Calvin built a digital presentation that explained in plain English what the trust's revisions meant. Ray called Helen's sister Gloria, who still had sway in church circles. She promised to bring folks. "You'll get the whole choir if I can swing it," she said. By Friday, the flyers were printed, the chairs were arranged, and the air in Burnett Ridge buzzed like something was about to break. The forum was packed. People stood against the walls, some even outside the open windows, straining to hear. Ray walked to the front, nervous but steady, and looked out at the faces, farmers, teachers, teenagers, the mayor's cousin, a man in a veteran's cap, who nodded at him with silent respect. He clicked the first slide. "This is what the Carolina Land Trust offered us," Ray said. It sounded good at first. But this, he pointed to a block of text, gives them the right to revoke our access if we violate vague standards of sustainability. Gasps. He clicked again. This another section allows them to terminate the partnership without cause after 5 years, which means all our work, all your donations, all your Saturdays in the sun, we'd lose it. No appeal. No discussion. A woman raised her hand. "What about the developers, the fancy condo deal?" Ray nodded. "That's still on the table too. Only they wouldn't pretend to protect it. They'd bulldoze and build, and they'd pay us double the value for the privilege." The room murmured. Confusion. Frustration. Ray took a breath. "We could take either offer and walk away with clean hands. But if we do, this garden, this field, everything it stands for, dies." Silence. Then a voice from the back. "So what do we do?" Ray stepped closer to the front. "We fight. We show the council that this land matters more than profit margins. We ask for emergency heritage zoning protection. We request a temporary injunction until we raise the rest ourselves, and we build louder support until no board or buyer can ignore us." Applause. Not thunderous, but sincere. After the forum, people stayed. They asked questions, offered help. A man from the fire department said he'd talk to council members. A teenager from the high school said she could organize a social media campaign. A retired lawyer said, "I'll go through that proposal line by line for free." That night, back at the Haven, Ray sat with Marianne at the kitchen table. "You think it'll be enough?" she asked. "I think it has to be," he said. Saturday morning came fast. The front lawn filled with handmade signs, "Keep Haven Green People Over Profit," and one bold one in red, "Not for sale. Not now. Not ever." The story hit local news again. The Asheville paper ran a headline, "A Garden's Last Stand." Donations ticked upward, but pressure mounted. Pierce emailed again. "The trust board will not consider additional revisions. The current agreement stands until Monday. After that, we retract." Ray didn't even respond. He stepped out onto the porch, saw the neighbors placing signs in their yards. The town council meeting was set for Tuesday night. They had one shot left. By Monday evening, Ray was exhausted. They'd held planning calls, reviewed city ordinances, prepped speeches. Jesse had edited a video of testimonials from local residents and kids who'd volunteered at the Haven. Ray sat under the old oak tree at the edge of the property, the same tree Helen used to read beneath. He pulled her last letter from his coat pocket. The paper was worn soft at the edges. Let yourself be part of it too. He read it twice, then tucked it back into his chest pocket like armor. Tuesday night arrived. Ray wore a clean shirt. Marianne had notes in a binder. Jesse carried a projector. Ruth baked a tray of lemon bars to bribe council staff. The town hall was packed. Ray sat in the front row, breathing slow, watching each speaker take their turn. The developers sent a lawyer. The trust sent Pierce. Each gave their pitch: progress, growth, sustainability. Then Ray stood. He looked up at the council, 7 people with tired eyes and businesslike expressions. I'm not a lawyer, he began. I'm not a real estate expert or a nonprofit executive. I'm just a man who came home looking for something to live for again. He paused. This land isn't just dirt. It's memory. It's healing. It's work done with calloused hands and stubborn hearts. And I'll be damned if we let it become just another line item in someone else's portfolio. The room was quiet. Then slowly applause broke out. Council members exchanged looks. The mayor leaned into her mic. We've heard your voices tonight. We'll review the request for interim zoning protection and vote in 2 days. As the crowd filed out, Jesse clapped Ray on the back. You did it. No, Ray said, glancing at the people, shaking hands, hugging, organizing. We did. Rain clung to the windows like it didn't want to leave. Ray stood at the sink, unmoving, his calloused hands wrapped around a chipped mug Helen once insisted was lucky. The kitchen was quiet, except for the low hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the floor settling beneath years of memories. The council had voted that morning a unanimous approval for an interim protection order on the Crawford field. No development, no deals. A pause, but only for 10 days. Just 10. Enough time to either finish the miracle they'd been working on or watch it dissolve in front of them. Jesse entered, holding a laptop, tension radiating off him like heat. We've raised $19.422 since the meeting, mostly small donors. It's something. Ray nodded, still short by a mile. More like $41,000, Jesse confirmed. Marianne was at her desk, voice hoarse from back-to-back calls. She hung up and sighed. That corporate matching grant denied, said it doesn't meet brand alignment, whatever that means. Ray turned to them both. We need something big, something public, loud, a night they'll remember. Jesse's eyes lit up. A fundraiser, like a real event, bigger, Ray said. We go all in. Music, food, stories, community. We don't ask for help, we celebrate what we already built. Remind them what's at stake. Marianne closed her notebook. We'll need permits, space, sound. I'll talk to Gloria, Ray said. She can get us the church lot. Ruth wandered in carrying flyers for the seed exchange next week. She looked at the mood in the room and tilted her head. Are we planning a wedding or a revolution? Ray cracked a smile. A little of both. Within 24 hours, it began to come together. Jesse called in favors from local musicians. Marianne emailed every donor with the event link. Ruth baked 3 dozen blueberry hand pies before noon, and then a curveball. A knock at the garden gate. Ray stepped out to see a woman in a trench coat, maybe in her 60s, standing with an umbrella and a leather portfolio. Mr. Walker, she asked, eyes kind but cautious. That's me. I'm Claire Weston. I used to work with your wife at the university. Helen was a friend. Ray's throat tightened. I remember the name. She spoke of you. Claire handed him a sealed envelope. Before she passed, she started setting up something. She never told me what for, but she named you as the beneficiary. Ray stared at the envelope like it was glowing. Inside was a certificate and endowment fund. Established quietly under Helen's name, seeded with money from a sabbatical grant she never used, and matched by a donor Claire never identified. The current value, $15,000. Ray stood there unmoving. Claire placed a hand gently on his shoulder. She told me once, if Ray ever finds something that gives him back his fire, make sure he has a little wind behind him. He looked up at her, jaw clenched. She gave me back a lot more than fire. With the money in place, they pushed harder. The fundraiser was set for Saturday evening on the lawn of First Baptist Church, where Helen once taught Sunday school and hosted potlucks with hand-labeled jars of peach preserves. They called it the Rooted Revival. By noon that Saturday, volunteers hung string lights, a bluegrass band tuned their banjos, and the smell of pulled pork and corn fritters drifted over the lot like a blessing. Kids painted signs, teens handed out flyers. The Haven Garden crew wore matching green shirts that read, "We grow more than vegetables." At 6:00 p.m., the place was packed. Ray stood near the mic looking out at the crowd. Farmers, neighbors, students, old soldiers, strangers who had only read about the fight online, but drove hours to be part of it. Jesse gave a short welcome followed by a video that played testimonials from volunteers, some of them teenagers, others retirees, all of them describing what Haven meant to them. Then Ray stepped up, the microphone trembling in his grip. He didn't read from the notes Marianne had written. He didn't need to. "My wife planted the first tomatoes here," he began. "Right out back. She said, 'The earth remembers who loves it.'" He paused, swallowing a lump in his throat. I didn't understand what she meant back then. Not really. But I do now. It's not about the tomatoes or the tools or the shed with the leaky roof. It's about choosing to stay when the world tells you to sell. To keep building when it's easier to cash out. He took a slow breath. You don't save something you love by playing it safe, you save it by showing up when it costs you everything. Silence, then clapping. Long sustained. The band kicked off. Food was served. Laughter returned to the lawn. Donation boxes filled fast. Online pledges soared. A local business owner stepped up to the mic and offered a $5,000 match challenge. Someone else raised their hand and matched it again. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Marianne took a phone call near the garden beds. She returned with eyes wide. The grant committee at the Community Preservation Fund saw the live stream, she said. They're pledging the final $10,000 if we submit receipts and impact reports by Monday. Ray blinked. Jesse looked stunned. We're fully funded. Marianne smiled. We are. The night ended with sparklers and hugs and promises shouted across the parking lot. Ray stood at the edge of it all, still not moving, as if afraid it might vanish if he blinked. Claire found him again, her umbrella now folded. She would have been proud, she said. Ray looked up at the stars and exhaled. She would have baked 5 pies and scolded me for crying in public. They both laughed, and it felt like a door inside him creaked open and let the light in. The frost arrived quietly that morning, a silver whisper across the garden beds. Ray stepped outside before sunrise boots crunching lightly on the grass, his breath turning white in the air. The haven looked peaceful, rows of greens tucked beneath burlap blankets, the cedar shed sealed for winter. The kind of stillness that made you believe something was being protected, not ended. In his coat pocket, he carried the letter. It had come 3 days earlier, hand-delivered by Claire. Helen wrote it the week before she passed, she'd said softly. She asked me to hold it until you'd done what you came back to do. Ray hadn't opened it. Not yet. Not until it was really over. That day they were set to sign the final deed transfer. The last piece, the final stamp. The field and the house legally protected, community-owned, and irrevocably rooted. But nothing ever came easy. Marianne's voice broke through the morning calm. They're stalling. Ray turned as she jogged across the lawn, clutching her phone. Her breath came fast, half from running, half from fury. The escrow manager said there's a clerical error, but I checked the docs. There's no mistake. Someone's delaying it on purpose. Who? Ray asked. She hesitated. Crane. He's been making calls again, whispering about zoning loopholes. Claims he can still make a move if the papers don't file by Friday. Ray ran a hand over his face. I thought we were past this. He's trying to kill the deal in the dark, she said. We have 2 days to finish the transfer or the protection clause expires. Ray didn't flinch. He just nodded once. Then we finish it. They got to work. Jesse called the city clerk to push the paperwork through. Marianne brought in a pro bono lawyer to sit in the room. Ruth typed a timeline of everything that had happened since the first offer from the first shovel in the dirt to the last dollar raised. Ray, meanwhile, made one final call to Paul Banner. I need eyes on Crane's maneuvering, Ray said. If he's working back channels, I want the flashlight on him before he gets too deep. Paul didn't hesitate. I'll get you something by morning. That night, the team gathered around Helen's old kitchen table. I don't get it, Jesse said, pacing. Why's Crane still pushing? We're not sitting on oil. This is a garden, a field. It's not about the land, Ray said. It's about beating the people who told him no. Silence. Ruth looked at the old ledger in her lap. So how do we stop him? Ray looked out the window toward the darkness beyond the Crawford field. We stay visible. We don't flinch. We walk into that office tomorrow morning with every damn paper in hand, and we sit there until someone signs or tells us they're willing to say no on record. The next day, they did just that. They arrived at the county office at 8:01 a.m., binders in hand, calm but unmovable. An hour passed, then 2. Crane never showed. At 11:45, the assistant county attorney stepped into the waiting area. We've confirmed all documents. There's no valid legal block. We'll record the transfer today. Ray exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. By 4 p.m., it was done. A notary slid the final stamped copy across the table. Congratulations, Mr. Walker. The land is yours. Ray stared at the paper hands, trembling slightly. No, he said quietly. It's ours. That night, back at the Haven, Ray finally opened the letter. It was short. Helen never wasted words. Ray, I knew if you came back here, it would be for a reason. Not for me. For you. You spent years giving pieces of yourself away to everyone else. To war. To grief. To silence. But this garden, this place, is where you finally started planting something again. You needed that. I think I did too. You don't have to carry everything. Just the parts worth keeping. And Ray, you're worth keeping too. Love always, H. Ray folded the letter slowly, eyes wet. The wind shifted. A soft breeze ran through the dried sunflowers, still standing proud by the fence. By the weekend, the community gathered for what was now being called Founders' Day. Not a celebration of winning, but a reminder that they'd never given up. Kids dug up carrots. Old men traded stories under the oak tree. Someone brought a speaker and played Motown. Gloria baked enough biscuits to feed an army. Ray didn't make a speech. He just walked the rows, hands in his jacket, nodding at people, listening to the way their laughter filled the space. A little boy ran past with a fistful of kale and shouted, "We saved the garden." Ray smiled. "Yeah, we did." Marianne stood beside him at the fence. "We should put up a new sign." Ray nodded. "What should it say?" She thought for a second, then planted by many, grown by all. They both smiled. The sun dipped low. Evening painted the rows in soft gold. And Ray felt it what Helen meant. He wasn't just here to guard something. He was here to live in it, in the dirt, in the people, in the work. Not everything had been healed. Not everything ever would be. But this garden, this fight, this soil, they had given him something he didn't think he'd feel again. Hope not as a dream, but as a daily act. A choice to stay. A reason to get up in the morning. And as he walked home that night, the garden behind him glowing under porch lights and laughter, Ray knew the truth that had been waiting all along. Sometimes saving a place means saving yourself in the process. And sometimes when you plant deep enough, what grows is more than food, more than flowers. What grows is a future you never thought you'd still be here to see.